There is nothing phonier than a live TV finale. Everyone is pretending to weep and hugging people they secretly hate just to get on camera. It is depressing as hell. I am Robin Andrews. My parents are down in the front row, acting like saints even though they abandoned me on a curb 15 years ago because I was an embarrassment. They think they are about to win the lottery, but they do not know I am the one signing the check. Before I tell you what happened, please like, share, comment, and subscribe to our channel. We always appreciate the time you spent here with us. I adjusted my headset and watched the house lights fade into darkness. From 50 feet above the stage, the world looks different. Up here in the darkened, air-conditioned sanctuary of the control booth, the chaos of the American Star Search finale is reduced to a series of glowing monitors and audio waveforms. Down there in the seating bowl, 3,000 people are screaming, their faces painted, their signs waving, desperate to touch a piece of the magic. But up here, there is only the hum of the servers and the cold, quiet calculation of business. I adjusted the cuffs of my silk blazer, my eyes scanning the VIP box located directly center stage. It was the best seat in the house, a spot usually reserved for industry titans or visiting royalty. But tonight, it was occupied by the Andrews family. My family. Not that they knew I was here. To the press, to the public, and certainly to the three people sitting in that velvet-roped enclosure, I was simply R.A., the reclusive CEO of Phoenix Records. I was the signature at the bottom of the $1 million contract sitting on the console desk in front of me. I was the hand of God that would either bless the winner's career or crush it before it began. And tonight I was watching them with the patience of a predator who has waited 15 years for the wind to shift. My father, Robert, was wearing a tuxedo that fit him a little too tightly around the waist, a rental he'd likely try to expense later. He was laughing at something the producer said, his head thrown back in that performative, boisterous way that used to terrify me as a child. Beside him sat my mother, Ellen. She was draped in sequins shimmering under the house lights, clutching a glass of champagne like a lifeline. She looked older, her neck slightly looser, her makeup applied with a heavier hand to mask the stress lines. But her eyes were the same sharp assessing, always looking for the next rung on the social ladder. And between them, or rather, the subject of their adoration, was the empty seat where my younger sister Melody would return after her final costume change. They were glowing with pride, not the quiet, humble pride of parents who have raised a good citizen, but the voracious, hungry pride of people who believe they have finally bred a winning racehorse. They were already spending the money. I could see it in the way my father dismissed the waiter, in the way my mother preened for the sweeping camera jib. They believed they had won. They believed the past was dead and buried, left behind on a dusty roadside in Texas a lifetime ago. I closed my eyes for a second, and the sterile smell of the control booth vanished, replaced instantly by the scent of pine needles, diesel exhaust, and hot asphalt. I was 13 years old again. It was the middle of July, the kind of heat that sticks your shirt to your back and makes the air shimmer off the highway. We were in the parking lot of the Silver Lake Choir Camp, a prestigious 2-week intensive for gifted youth. I sat in the back seat of our station wagon, my duffel bag packed with the wrong clothes because my mother hadn't bothered to check the packing list. Melody, who was only 10 then, but already the golden child, was in the front seat humming a scale. She wasn't staying. She was too young. We were just dropping me off. Or so I thought. I remembered the camp counselor, a kind-faced woman named Mrs. Higgins, walking up to the car with a clipboard. She had smiled at me through the window, but my father didn't roll it down for me. He rolled it down for himself. "Mr. Andrews," Mrs. Higgins had said, beaming, "we are so excited to work with Robin. We've heard she has a lot of enthusiasm." My father hadn't smiled back. He exchanged a look with my mother, a look I had spent my entire childhood trying to decode, only to realize too late that it was a look of shared burden. "Look," my father said, his voice loud enough that the other parents unloading their talented children could hear. "Let's be realistic. We need a break. The girl is tone deaf. She's an embarrassment at the church performances, and quite frankly, her practicing is distracting Melody." I froze in the back seat. The humiliation wasn't a hot flush. It was a cold douse of ice water. Mrs. Higgins looked stricken, her smile faltering. "Sir, this is a camp for developing voices." My mother cut her off, leaning across the console. "She doesn't have a voice to develop, dear. Just keep her busy with crafts, make lanyards, paint rocks, whatever keeps her quiet. We need to focus on Melody's rehearsals for the pageant. We'll be back in 2 weeks." And then, the sound that haunted my nightmares for a decade, the hydraulic hiss of the automatic windows rolling up. They didn't even say goodbye. I watched through the tinted glass as my father put the car in gear and drove away, kicking up a cloud of dust that coated my sneakers. I stood there, 13 years old, clutching a sleeping bag while the other campers stared. They knew. Kids always know when someone has been discarded. I spent those 2 weeks making lanyards just as my mother ordered my mouth shut tight, my heart hardening into something dense and unbreakable. But the real blow came 2 weeks later. The final concert ended. Parents flooded the lawn, hugging their children, loading up cars. I sat on my duffel bag near the main gate watching the sun go down. Cars left one by one until the lot was empty. The counselors made calls. No answer. My parents didn't come. They simply didn't come. It wasn't until the next morning that my Aunt Sarah, my father's estranged sister, rolled up in her beat-up sedan looking furious and tired. She had driven 6 hours through the night because my parents had called her and said, "We can't deal with Robin right now. She's ruining the vibe for Melody's big break. You take her." That was the last time I lived under their roof. I grew up in Aunt Sarah's small apartment, sharing a room with her sewing machine, working 3 jobs to put myself through college, while my parents chased fame across the country, with Melody burning bridges and money in equal measure. I opened my eyes, the memory receding, but the sting remaining fresh. I looked down at the contract on the desk. Phoenix Records. I had named the company after what happens when you burn something to the ground. It comes back stronger. I built this empire on the back of sleepless nights, bad coffee, and a refusal to ever let anyone silence me again. I started as a mixer, fixing bad vocals for pop stars who couldn't sing, learning the technical wizardry of the studio. I learned that talent is common, but leverage is rare. I saved, I invested, I bought out a failing label and turned it into a powerhouse. And now, here I was. The industry knew RA was a genius, a recluse, a kingmaker. My parents just thought I was the failure they washed their hands of. They had no idea that the tone-deaf girl they abandoned was the one holding the pen. The stage manager's voice crackled over the headset. 5 minutes to air. Melody Andrews to stage right. I watched my sister appear in the wings. She looked beautiful. I had to give her that. She was polished to a high sheen, a product of years of pageants and coaching, terrified to make a mistake, desperate for approval. She was a vessel for my parents' ambition, hollowed out and filled with their dreams. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then I looked at my mother in the VIP box, laughing, raising her glass to the camera, basking in the reflection of a light she didn't create. They were so sure of the narrative. They loved the story of the prodigy daughter. But they had forgotten the most important rule of American storytelling: we don't root for the kings and queens. We root for the underdog. We root for the one who was left behind in the dirt and found a way to stand up. Tonight, I wasn't just a producer. I was the reckoning. I reached out and tapped the glass of the monitor right over my father's smiling face. The audio engineer next to me shifted, but I didn't look away from the screen. The plan was in motion. The trap was set. They wanted a show. I was going to give them a finale they would never forget. If you've ever been the one left behind or the one they bet against, you know exactly how cold that fire burns in your chest. Let me know in the comments if you've ever had to build your own castle just to prove you deserved a home. Don't be shy to share your thoughts. Your story might inspire our future episodes. I slipped out of the control booth and into the labyrinth of the backstage corridors. The air down here was thick with the scent of industrial hairspray, nervous sweat, and the ozone tang of overheating electronics. I pulled the brim of my black baseball cap, embroidered with the subtle gold phoenix logo of my company, low over my eyes. I added a pair of oversized sunglasses, a common enough accessory in this industry, to pass for eccentricity rather than concealment. I needed to gauge the atmosphere on the ground floor to feel the pulse of the production before I stopped its heart. As I rounded the corner near the dressing rooms, I saw them. My parents were holding court in a narrow hallway, flanked by a young, eager reporter from a national entertainment blog. A production assistant was trying to usher them toward their seats, but my father, Robert, had planted his feet like a tree stump. He wasn't moving until he got his soundbite. I slowed my pace, blending into a cluster of stagehands, pushing a road case, and let myself drift within earshot. "It hasn't been easy," my mother was saying, dabbing a dry eye with a tissue. She had perfected the role of the martyr mother. We sacrificed everything for Melody. We mortgaged the house twice. We drove thousands of miles. But when you have a child with a gift like that, you have a moral obligation to share it with the world. The reporter nodded sympathetically, her thumb flying over her phone screen. "It must be incredible to see it pay off. Is the whole family here tonight to celebrate?" I stopped walking. My breath hitched in my throat. This was the test. This was the moment they could acknowledge the daughter they left behind, the one who survived. My father cleared his throat, puffing out his chest. "We're a tight-knit unit." He lied, his voice smooth as oil. "It's just the three of us against the world. Melody is our only child, really. Our entire universe." The words hit me like a physical blow to the sternum. Our only child. It wasn't just that they had abandoned me. They had rewritten reality to erase me completely. I was an editing error they had cut from the final print. I watched them for a moment longer, a cold, dark amusement bubbling up in my chest. They had no idea that the ghost was currently paying for the venue, the lights, and the very airtime they were breathing. I turned on my heel and walked away, the resolve in my gut hardening into diamond. If I didn't exist in their world, then they wouldn't see me coming until the sky fell on them. I navigated the maze of cables back toward the technical sector, my mind replaying the crime that had escalated this from a simple grudge to a corporate execution. It wasn't just the abandonment at camp. I could have lived with that. I had processed that trauma in therapy years ago. No, the real sin, the one that forced my hand tonight, happened 3 months ago. Melody had shown up at my apartment in the city. She had found me through a mutual acquaintance, playing the part of the desperate, overwhelmed little sister. She cried on my imported Italian sofa, telling me she was going to lose her spot on American Star Search because she didn't have a winning single for the finale. She had the voice, she said, but she didn't have the song. I let my guard down. I made the mistake of thinking blood might still mean something. I opened my personal safe and played her a demo tape, a raw, soulful ballad titled The Echo of Home that I had written and recorded myself. It was my story. It was about the camp, the loneliness, the resilience. Melody had wept when she heard it. She hugged me, thanked me for the wine, and left. The next morning, the tape was gone. 2 weeks later, she debuted her original song on the semifinals. It was my song. She had stolen my voice, my pain, and my property, and my parents had undoubtedly helped her polish the lie. I swiped my key card at the heavy steel door of the sound engineering booth and stepped inside, locking the world out. The room was bathed in blue LED light, humming with the power of 1,000 audio channels. Sitting at the main console, wearing a headset and looking like he hadn't slept in a week, was the lead audio engineer. He spun around as the door clicked shut. "You're cutting it close, R.A.," he said, his voice gravelly. "They're in commercial. Melody is up in 10. I took off the hat and sunglasses, shaking out my hair. "I had to see them, Caleb. I had to be sure. Caleb Andrews, my cousin, and the only other defector from our toxic family tree, looked at me with sad, knowing eyes. Caleb had left the family orbit when he was 16, refusing to let my father bully him into a law degree he didn't want. He had found me 5 years ago, and I had hired him instantly. He was the best ear in the business, and more importantly, he was the only person on earth I trusted. "Did they see you?" he asked, turning back to the massive mixing board that looked like the cockpit of a spaceship. "No," I said, stepping up beside him. "They're too busy giving interviews about their only child." Caleb snorted a sharp, bitter sound. "Figured. All right, let's review the kill switch." He pointed to a specific channel on the board marked with a piece of red tape. "This is Melody's live mic feed, channel 4. Right now it's hot." He moved his finger to a digital display on the screen above. "And this is the backing track she provided. She thinks it's just instrumentation with some light backing vocals for the chorus. But because she's lazy, and because she thinks she's untouchable, she submitted the full guide track version you recorded on the demo, intending to lip-sync the high notes. She thinks the engineer me will just blend it so nobody notices." I looked at the waveform on the screen. It was my voice, my literal voice, digitized and ready to be broadcast to 10 million homes. "And the override?" I asked. Caleb tapped a small customized button he had programmed into the macro deck. "The isolate command. When you give the signal, I hit this. It kills channel 4, her microphone, completely, but it boosts the backing track to 100%. The music stays, the vocals stay. She'll be moving her mouth, but the voice coming out of the speakers will be yours, crystal clear. And since she'll be holding a dead mic, the world sees the fraud. I finished, a shiver of anticipation running down my spine. And then I take the live mic. I picked up the wireless Sennheiser microphone sitting on the console. It was already live routed to the PA system, but currently muted. Suddenly, the door to the booth burst open. The show director, a frantic man named Marcus with a headset clinging to his sweaty bald head, stormed in. "We have a problem," he shouted, waving a clipboard. "The network is breathing down my neck. The previous act went 2 minutes over. We need to cut time." I'm scrapping Melody's intro package and moving her slot up. She goes on in 2 minutes, not 10. And I need to shorten the song. My stomach dropped. If they shortened the song, we'd miss the bridge, the part where I needed to sing. If they moved her up, the lighting cues for my reveal wouldn't be ready. The chaos of live TV was threatening to derail 15 years of planning. Caleb looked at me, his eyes wide. He couldn't argue with the director. He was just an employee. But I wasn't. I stepped out of the shadows of the booth, crossing my arms. "No," I said, my voice cutting through the panic like a scalpel. Marcus blinked, seeing me for the first time. "Who are—" Then he recognized me. The color drained from his face. "R.A., I didn't know you were on site." "The running order stays exactly as it is." "Marcus," I said, my tone calm, but leaving no room for negotiation. "Melody Andrews is the finale. She performs the full song. If the network needs to cut time, cut the judges' banter, cut the commercial break, I don't care. But the performance happens as scheduled." Marcus stammered, wiping sweat from his forehead. "But the ad revenue, the timing block." "I am the ad revenue," I reminded him, stepping closer. "Phoenix Records is underwriting this entire season. If I pull my funding because you compromise the artistic integrity of the finale, you won't just have a timing problem. You'll have a legal one." It was a bluff mostly, but in showbiz, perception is reality. Marcus swallowed hard, looking between me and the mixing board. He saw the cold certainty in my eyes. He nodded, tapping his headset. "Copy that. We cut the judges. Melody stays in the slot. Full duration." He backed out of the room, closing the door softly. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. Caleb grinned, turning back to the board. "Boss moves," he muttered. 2 minutes to air. I gripped the microphone, my knuckles turning white. The hurdle was cleared. The trap was set. My parents were in the box, my sister was in the wings, and I was the finger on the trigger. The time for hiding was over. It was time to sing. The studio lights shifted from a cool, preparatory blue to a blinding, molten gold. The roar of the audience was a physical force vibrating through the glass of the control booth and rattling the coffee cup on the console. Down on the stage, the massive LED screens parted and Melody walked out. I had to admit the image was perfect. My parents had spent thousands on stylists, and it showed. She wore a gown of shimmering white silk that caught the light like a prism, her hair cascading in carefully constructed waves. She looked innocent. She looked triumphant. She looked like the daughter who had never known a day of rejection in her life. The opening piano chords of The Echo of Home began to play, a melancholic, haunting progression I had composed on a rainy Tuesday 3 years ago, alone in my apartment. To the millions watching at home, this was the coronation of America's newest sweetheart. To me, it was a crime scene. "Stand by on isolate," Caleb murmured, his finger hovering over the macro button. His face was pale, bathed in the glow of the mixing board. This was the point of no return. If we did this, there was no going back to the shadows. We were burning the bridge and the castle along with it. Hold, I said, my eyes fixed on the monitor. Let her get comfortable. Let them believe it. Melody reached the center stage, grabbed the microphone stand, and closed her eyes. She began to sing. Her mouth moved, her expressions contorted with practiced emotion, and through the speakers came a voice that was rich, raspy, and full of pain. It was a beautiful voice. It was my voice. I watched the VIP box. My mother was clutching my father's arm, tears streaming down her face. They were real tears, I'm sure tears of relief that their investment was finally paying out. They were mouthing the words along with her words about being left behind, about waiting for a car that never comes. The irony was so thick it nearly choked me. They were crying over a song about their own cruelty, oblivious to the fact that they were the villains in the lyrics. The audience was swaying cell phone flashlights, swaying like fireflies in the darkened arena. Melody was selling it. She pulled the microphone off the stand, walking toward the edge of the stage, reaching out to the front row. She was confident now. She thought she had gotten away with it. She thought the demo tape was her little secret buried in the mix. Approaching the bridge, Caleb counted down. 30 seconds to the high C. The bridge was the emotional peak of the song. It was the moment the narrator screams into the void. It required power breath control and a raw vulnerability that Melody simply didn't possess. In our rehearsals back when I was foolish enough to try and teach her, she had cracked on that note every time. That was why she needed the track. She needed me to hit the note for her. Get ready, I whispered, picking up my own wireless microphone. I checked the switch. It was on. I walked to the door of the booth, which opened onto a small, high balcony overlooking the stage right. It was a technical platform usually used for riggers, but tonight it was my pulpit. Wait for the reach, I told Caleb over the headset. When she reaches for the high note, cut her throat. On stage, Melody built up the momentum. The drums kicked in. She threw her head back, her arm extending toward the rafters, preparing for the glory note. She opened her mouth wide. Now, I commanded. Caleb slammed his finger onto the isolate button. The effect was instantaneous and brutal. In the arena, the sound of Melody's breathy, exerted gasps vanished. The live feed from her microphone was dead. However, the vocals, my pre-recorded vocals, suddenly jumped in volume, crystal clear and perfect. And the silence is the only thing that stays. The voice boomed through the stadium speakers, but on stage Melody had made a fatal error. Caught up in the theatricality of the moment, she had pulled the microphone away from her face to gesture at the crowd, a classic diva move intended to show passion. It was a move that only works when you are actually singing. The result was a glitch in the matrix. The audience saw Melody holding the microphone at her waist, her mouth closed in a triumphant smile, while the voice continued to belt out a sustain that shook the rafters. The illusion shattered instantly. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd, louder than the music. It wasn't a boo. It was the sound of 3,000 brains trying to reconcile what they were seeing with what they were hearing. Melody froze. She heard the vocals continuing without her. She looked at the microphone in her hand, panic flaring in her eyes like a trapped animal. She frantically brought the mic back to her lips, trying to catch up to the track, but she was out of sync. She was mouthing words that had already been sung. The music dropped out. Caleb killed the backing track. Silence crashed into the arena, heavy and suffocating. Melody stood center stage, the microphone trembling in her hand, the soft whir of the cooling fans, the only sound in the room. She looked up at the booth, her eyes wide with terror. The audience began to murmur, a low, angry sound, building like a wave. The judges looked at each other confused. My parents in the VIP box were standing up, my father, gesturing wildly at the sound technician in the pit, assuming it was a technical failure. I stepped out onto the balcony. The spotlight operator, following the cue sheet I had personally revised that morning, swung the main spot off of Melody and up to me. I was blinded for a split second, bathed in the white heat of the light, but I didn't flinch. I raised my microphone. "That's a hard note to hit, isn't it, Melody?" My voice, live and unprocessed, boomed through the PA system. It was the exact same timbre, the exact same tone as the recording they had just heard. The murmuring stopped. Every head in the arena turned upward. Melody shielded her eyes, looking up at me. "Robin," she whispered, but her mic was dead, so she was just a small, silent figure mouthing my name. "You can't lip-sync the truth," I said, my voice steady. "You need the person who lived it." I signaled Caleb. He brought the piano track back in just the simple, stripped-back chords of the bridge. I didn't look at the teleprompter. I didn't need to. I closed my eyes and sang. I waited by the gate until the sun went down, a ghost in the parking lot of this painted town. You wanted a trophy, but you left a child. Now the garden is dead and the weeds are wild. I sang it live. I sang it with the cracks in my voice, with the breath that caught in my chest, with the 15 years of silence finally finding an exit. There was no auto-tune, no backing track, just me. The acoustic purity of it was undeniable. The audience was paralyzed. They looked from the girl in the white dress, who was now weeping silently on stage, to the woman in the shadows above her, who possessed the voice they had fallen in love with. When I finished the phrase, I let the note hang in the air until it faded into total silence. I walked to the railing of the balcony and looked directly at the VIP box. The camera operators, sensing the drama, threw the feed onto the giant screens behind the stage. My parents' faces were now 40 feet tall, my mother's hand over her mouth, my father's face drained of all color, looking like a man who had just watched his house burn down. They saw me. They really saw me for the first time since that day at the camp. I didn't shout. I didn't scream. I spoke with the calm authority of the CEO I had become. "Mom, Dad," I said, my voice echoing through the silence. "You left me at Silver Lake Choir Camp because you said I was tone deaf. You told the counselors to keep me busy with crafts because I was an embarrassment." A gasp went through the crowd. My mother flinched as if I had slapped her. "You spent a lifetime betting on the pretty horse." I continued, looking down at Melody, who had sunk to her knees. "But you backed the wrong daughter, and you stole from the wrong artist." I lowered the microphone. The silence held for one heartbeat, 2, 3, and then the arena exploded. It wasn't applause for a performance. It was the chaotic, deafening noise of a scandal breaking in real time. I turned away from the railing, walking back into the darkness of the booth, leaving them in the spotlight they had craved so desperately. The truth was out. The song was mine, and the payment was due. The adrenaline that had sustained me through the performance vanished the moment the heavy soundproof door of the booth clicked shut behind me, replaced by a cold, vibrating clarity. Through the thick glass, I could see the chaos unfolding in the arena below. It was pandemonium. The audience wasn't leaving. They were standing on their chairs, debating, arguing, pointing up at the booth, and looking down at the stage where my sister was being ushered off by two production assistants, like a criminal suspect being shielded from the press. Caleb sat at the console, his hands trembling slightly as he pulled the master faders down, killing the house audio completely. He spun his chair around to face me, his face a mixture of awe and terror. "The network just cut the feed," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "They went to a breaking news splash screen. You just broke the internet, Robin." I didn't feel triumphant. Not yet. I felt the heavy, inevitable gravity of what had to happen next. "Secure the recording," I told him, my voice sounding more like the CEO of Phoenix Records than the cousin he grew up with. "Keep the raw vocal track. If they try to sue for defamation, that isolate track is our defense. It proves I didn't alter her performance. I just revealed it." Caleb nodded, typing furiously. "Where are you going?" he asked. "To finish it," I said. I adjusted my blazer, checked my reflection in the darkened monitor. My eyes looked tired but fierce, and walked out into the hallway. The walk to the green room was a surreal procession. Usually, I moved through these corridors, invisible, a ghost in the machine. Now, every head turned. Stage hands stopped pushing carts to stare. The security guards, big men who usually looked through me, nodded respectfully as I passed. I had just hijacked a national broadcast, and in the twisted logic of Hollywood, that made me the most powerful person in the building. I didn't stop for the reporters clamoring at the security checkpoints. I walked straight to the executive green room, the one reserved for talent and family, and pushed the door open. The room was silent, save for the jagged, gasping sobs coming from the corner. Melody was curled up on a beige love seat, her face buried in her hands, her pristine white dress crumpled and stained with tears. My parents were pacing the floor like caged tigers. My father was on his phone, screaming at someone, presumably a lawyer or a publicist, while my mother was aggressively picking at a fruit platter, her movements jerky and manic. When I entered, the atmosphere in the room shifted from panic to targeted rage. My mother saw me first. Her eyes, usually so composed, were wild. She didn't just walk toward me, she lunged. "You!" she shrieked, pointing a manicured finger that shook with fury. "You spiteful, jealous little... How could you? How could you do this to your own sister? To us?" She stopped inches from my face, her perfume cloying and thick in the small room. "Do you have any idea what you've just done? You've humiliated us. You've ruined her career before it even started. I hope you're happy, Robin. I hope your petty little revenge was worth destroying your family." My father hung up his phone and joined the assault, his face a mottled red. "I'll sue the network," he spat, his voice booming. "I'll sue the production company. I'll make sure you never work in this town again. You think you can sabotage my daughter and walk away? I'll have your license, whatever it is you actually do." I stood my ground, letting their words wash over me like dirty water. I didn't flinch. I didn't shout back. I waited until they ran out of breath, until the silence stretched thin and taut between us. Then I walked past them to the center of the room and sat down on the edge of the mahogany coffee table, looking down at them. "You can't sue the production company, Dad," I said quietly, "because I own the production company." The silence that followed was absolute. My father blinked, his mouth slightly open. "What? And you can't sue the record label?" I continued smoothing a crease in my trousers. Because I am the record label. I reached into the inner pocket of my blazer and pulled out a business card, heavy stock gold foil, simple text. R.A., CEO Phoenix Records. I tossed it onto the table. It spun and landed face up between them. I'm R.A. Dad, Robin Andrews. Phoenix Records is mine. I built it. I funded this entire show. The $1 million contract, the tour, the signing bonus. That's my money. All of it. My mother looked at the card, then at me, then back at the card. Her brain was trying to reconfigure 15 years of narrative. The loser daughter, the tone-deaf burden, the one they left at camp, was the shadowy figure they had been trying to impress for 6 months. That's not possible, she stammered, her voice losing its edge. You, you fix radios? You work in a studio? I own the studio, I corrected her, and the publishing rights, and the distribution network. I looked over at Melody, who had stopped crying and was staring at me with wide, terrified eyes. She knew. She had seen my apartment. She had seen the gold records on the wall that she thought belonged to my roommates. Melody knew I had money, I said. She just didn't know I was the boss. Did you, Mel? Melody shook her head, unable to speak. The contract, I said, my voice hardening, has a standard morality and integrity clause. Paragraph 4, Section C. Any artist found to be engaging in deceptive practices, including but not limited to plagiarism, theft of intellectual property, or falsification of performance, will be immediately terminated. I looked at my father. Stealing my demo tape, that's theft. Lip-syncing to my vocals on live TV, that's fraud. The deal is dead, Dad. The money is gone. There is no tour. There is no album. There is just the truth. My father collapsed onto the sofa next to Melody. He looked suddenly small. The air let out of his chest. He wasn't mourning the loss of his daughter's dream. He was mourning the loss of his retirement plan. He was doing the math in his head, the mortgages, the loans, the credit card debt they had racked up betting on the talented child, and realizing the sum was zero. But, my mother whispered, her voice trembling, Robin, we're family. You wouldn't let us starve. We did this for her. We just wanted one of you to make it. One of us did make it, I said, my voice cold. The one you left in the parking lot. The door opened behind me. Caleb walked in. He wasn't wearing his headset anymore. He was wearing his leather jacket, a backpack slung over one shoulder. He looked at the scene, the devastated parents, the weeping sister, and me sitting calmly in the wreckage. He walked over and stood next to me, crossing his arms. The visual was striking, the two black sheep, the two cousins who had been dismissed as difficult and rebellious, standing united as the victors. The car's waiting out back, boss, Caleb said, emphasizing the title. Security has cleared a path through the loading dock. The press is swarming the front. My father looked up at Caleb. He recognized him now not as the guy in the booth, but as the nephew he had called a dropout 10 years ago. Caleb, my father rasped, you're part of this. I'm the lead engineer, Uncle Rob. Caleb said, his voice devoid of any warmth. I've been running sound for Robin for 5 years. She pays my salary. She pays for my apartment. She's the only family that ever showed up for me. I stood up. The room felt smaller now, or maybe I just felt bigger. We're leaving, I said. The press will want a statement. I suggest you tell them the truth. It's easier to remember. I turned to go, but stopped at the door. I looked back at my mother. She was weeping now, not the performative tears for the cameras, but the ugly, desperate tears of a woman who realizes she threw away a diamond to chase a rhinestone. You didn't want a daughter, I said, my voice soft but final. You wanted a show. Well, I gave you one. Caleb held the door open for me. We walked out into the cool air of the loading dock, leaving the door slightly ajar, framing the tableau of a family that had finally brutally run out of lies. The silence behind us was heavy, but for the first time in 15 years, it wasn't my silence to carry. If you've ever been the one holding the family together while everyone else tried to tear you down, or if you've had the satisfaction of proving your doubters wrong without saying a word, I want to hear your story. Drop a comment below. Sometimes the best revenge is just living well and locking the door. 2 hours later, the glamour of the broadcast was a distant memory, replaced by the humming neon buzz of Jerry's 24-hour diner on the corner of 4th and Main. The contrast was almost comical. My parents were still wearing their gala attire. My father in his rumpled tuxedo, my mother in her sequined gown that now looked garish under the harsh, unforgiving fluorescent lights. Melody sat in the booth next to them, her makeup streaked, wearing an oversized hoodie she must have pulled from a gym bag to cover her dress. They looked like castaways from a shipwreck, washed up on the shores of a laminate tabletop, sticky with maple syrup. Caleb and I sat across from them. I had changed into jeans and a sweater, scrubbing the corporate RA persona off my skin in the studio bathroom before we left. I stirred my black coffee, the spoon clinking against the ceramic mug, the sound sharp in the quiet booth. I had texted them the location 10 minutes after leaving the green room. I could have left them there to face the media wolves alone. I could have driven back to my penthouse, opened a bottle of vintage red, and toasted to my victory. But revenge, I realized, as the adrenaline faded, leaves a hollow space where the anger used to be. I didn't just want to destroy them, I wanted them to understand. I wanted to look them in the eye without the stage lights blinding us. Eat, I said, pushing a plate of fries toward the center of the table. You look like you're going to pass out, Mom. My mother looked at the fries, then at me. Her eyes were red-rimmed and swollen. The arrogance that had defined her for decades, the armor she wore to protect herself from the world, was gone. She looked old. She looked tired. She picked up a fry with a trembling hand, but didn't eat it. Why are we here, Robin? She asked, her voice raspy. Are you going to gloat? Is this part 2 of the show? There are no cameras here, I said softly. No press, no contracts, just us. I wanted to see if we could actually have a conversation, a real one, not a press release. My father sighed, a deep rattling sound in his chest. He slumped against the red vinyl booth. We're ruined, he muttered. The internet it's a bloodbath. They're calling us monsters. They're calling Melody a fraud. We can't go back to Texas. We can't show our faces at the club. Good, I said. He looked up startled. You needed to be ruined, Dad. You were building a life on a foundation of sand. You were spending money you didn't have, chasing a dream that wasn't yours, and using your children as currency. It had to stop. Melody sniffled, wiping her nose with the sleeve of her hoodie. She looked younger now, stripped of the diva persona. She looked like the little sister I used to know before she became the golden child. I didn't want to steal the tape, she whispered, staring into her milkshake. I told them I couldn't write a song. I told them I wasn't ready. But Mom said if I didn't win, we'd lose the house. She said I had to do whatever it took. I was scared, Robin. I just wanted to make them happy. I looked at my mother. She didn't deny it. She closed her eyes and a single tear tracked through the heavy foundation on her cheek. I never had a talent, my mother said, her voice barely audible. I was just Ellen from the suburbs. Nobody ever looked at me. Nobody ever clapped for me. When Melody started singing, I felt like I was finally someone. I wanted her to have the life I was too afraid to chase. And you? She opened her eyes and looked at me, a look of genuine regret mixing with the shame. You were so independent. Even at 10, you didn't need me. You were tone deaf, sure, but you were strong. I pushed you away because you reminded me of everything I wasn't. You didn't need my validation, and I hated you for it. It was the first honest thing she had said to me in 15 years. It didn't fix the past. It didn't erase the lonely nights at Aunt Sarah's or the sting of abandonment, but it made sense of it. They weren't evil masterminds. They were weak, broken people who had broken their children in an attempt to fix themselves. I'm not signing you Melody, I said, addressing the elephant in the room. My father stiffened, ready to argue, but I held up a hand. Not because I'm angry, but because it would kill you. You don't want to be a pop star. You want to be a daughter. If I give you a contract now, the media will tear you apart, and you'll spend the next 10 years trying to be what Mom wants you to be. I won't fund your destruction. Then what do we do? My father asked, his voice hollow. We have nothing. I reached into my bag and pulled out a checkbook. I saw the spark of hope in my father's eyes, the gambler thinking he just got a reprieve, but I crushed it instantly. I'm not paying your mortgage, Dad, and I'm not buying you a new car. I wrote a check and slid it across the table. It was made out to a renowned family therapy center in Houston, not to them. This covers 1 year of intensive counseling for all 3 of you, and it covers tuition for Melody to go to college if she wants to study something real, something she chooses, maybe accounting, maybe botany. I don't care, as long as she doesn't sing a note until she actually wants to. Melody looked at the check, then at me. You'd do that after I stole from you. You're my sister, I said. You're a thief, and you're a brat, but you're my sister. I'm not saving you from the consequences, Mel. You have to face the internet. You have to apologize. It's going to suck, but I'm giving you an off-ramp. Take it. My father stared at the check. It wasn't the $1,000,000 he wanted, but it was a lifeline. He looked at me, really looked at me, and I saw the shift. The realization that the failure daughter was the only one acting like an adult. Thank you, he said, his voice thick. I don't deserve it. No, I agreed. You don't, but I'm not doing it for you. I'm doing it so I can sleep at night knowing I didn't become you. I stood up, dropping enough cash on the table to cover the meal and a generous tip for the waitress who had been eyeing our table with concern. Caleb stood up with me, zipped his jacket, and gave my father a curt nod. Take care of them, Uncle Rob, Caleb said. Actually, take care of them this time. We walked out of the diner into the cool night air. The parking lot was quiet, the distant hum of the highway the only sound. The weight that had been sitting on my chest since I was 13 years old, the need to prove them wrong, the need to scream, I am here, was gone. It hadn't disappeared with a bang, but with a quiet, settling sigh. I didn't hate them anymore. I pitied them. And pity, I realized, is the opposite of love, but it is also the opposite of hate. It is indifference. I was finally free. I climbed into the driver's seat of my car, Caleb hopping in next to me. I started the engine, the dashboard lighting up with a soft, comforting glow. "So," Caleb said, reclining the seat and closing his eyes. "What now, boss? We have a label to run." "Tomorrow we run the label," I said, putting the car in gear. "Tonight we drive." I pulled out onto the main road, watching the diner shrink in the rearview mirror until the neon sign was just a blur of red and blue, and then, finally, nothing at all. The road ahead was dark, but my headlights cut a clear, steady path through it. I wasn't R.A. the Avenger anymore. I wasn't Robin the Abandoned. I was just Robin. And for the first time in my life, the silence wasn't empty. It was peaceful. Forgiveness is a tricky thing sometimes. It's not about letting people back in, but about letting the anger out so you can finally breathe. If you've ever had to make the hard choice between revenge and peace, or if you've had to set a boundary with family to save yourself, I'd love to hear how you handled it. Don't be shy to share your thoughts. Your story might inspire our future episodes. Robin finally found peace by realizing her worth didn't depend on her family's approval. Have you ever had to cut ties with toxic family members to save yourself, or succeeded despite those who doubted you? Don't be shy to share your thoughts in the comments. Your story might be the inspiration for our future episodes. We read every single comment. Thank you for listening. This has been a story from Radiance. We'll see you next time.